Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I say this is the morning podcast with Jacob and Ethan.
This is hell. Norwegian blood.
That song's about sex.
Well, yeah, it's like he like goes over to someone's house, and then like the very last line he's like, and I burnt her house down. Right? Isn't that what he's saying? It's like kind of wild.
Yeah. I don't know. Premarital sex is bad. Don't do it.
Ah, so true.
So evil.
It's so haram.
I like to go on the record in favor. I think it's great.
So anyway, tell me about your guys' lives, because I tell me what's going on with you all.
I guess like I was saying, I'm in planning now. I don't know if we started recording yet for that, but it's going good. Going good. Been out in the dating world again, trying to keep myself busy, but that's been sort of funny, dipping my toes into that as a 30-year-old, because I basically I was just in this one relationship for basically all my 20s, post-college till now. So re-entering the world as a 30-year-old is kind of funny, but it's going well so far.
It's terrifying. It's awful.
I mean,
not really. Not in New York City. Yeah, not in New York.
Yeah, it's kind of it's fun mostly. Sometimes it's a drag, but it's going all right.
I also can't go up to somebody and be like, I work for the government. Like, what do I tell them? Like,
I don't do that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I do. Things did turn around for me when I did get employed. So I not that comes up like first thing either, but.
You got a vibe. You got an employee. I got a career vibe.
Yeah, I think that's true. Also, like there was a second where there was quite a while actually where I was dating, but like my partner and I were still living together while we just figured out the logistics, and like once they finally moved out, I think also that was another thing where like the vibe shifted a bit, where it's like, okay, this is a little bit easier now. And it's not like that was known, but I think it's just one of those things that you
give off.
Yeah,
I have to figure out how to give off employed energy.
Well, you mean you are employed?
I know, but I'm not giving off that energy apparently.
Okay. You just carry a briefcase around.
I mean, like I just try to like be like, look, I got a Costco card. I'm like very like.
Yeah. I never learned how to talk to girls. The only way I got girls was by being very big personalitied. So I still think
that's 30, a popular way. I think people like big personalities. People, at least people love a big, gregarious, goofy man. Not saying that you're goofy, but if you wanted to do that, I think that is well liked.
Oh, Brit, you remember when that girl came up and started like we were at? I mean, it happened a bunch of times we were out. But what was that girl that came up and started making out with me at that party, and I was very confused when I continued to pursue her? It was one of the frat parties.
I think I went to like one frat party ever.
It was at that frat across the street from Carmen. You remember, Peaches?
Oh yeah, I don't think I was there.
Yeah, you weren't with us. I think it was like me and.
It must have been freshman year.
It was maybe sophomore, but we were over. This is what kind of the dynamic is for me. I feel like in life, this girl comes over. I'm doing my thing. She kisses me or starts making out with me. Goes off to do her thing. I think, oh, I can go continue to pursue this woman. And then she is like very much like not about it. And I'm like, well, what changed? Like, why did you want to come make out with me, but had no interest in like continuing the interaction?
Maybe you were bad at making out.
No, I'm good. I'm a good kisser.
That is a confusing environment. I think this is also maybe a good example of why maybe dating at 30 is much more intuitive and easier to me, because that scenario does sound legitimately baffling, and I'm glad I'm no longer in that sort of situation. On all sides.
There was another frat party too where like I was dancing. I don't know if you want to hear these awful things, or I can just
go for it.
But there was one where I was dancing with this girl. I'm grinding on her, and she has me put her hands on her tits. So she grabs my hands and puts them up on her tits. And then her friend, who is also at the party, like keeps looking over at me and like intermittently like pulling my hands down. And then like her friend keeps on having me put my hands on places on her body. Like the one I'm dancing with keeps having me put my hands on places on her body while her friend keeps giving me daggers. And I'm like, it's just like so confusing. Like I don't know what to do in this situation, sort of thing.
Yeah, hard to. Yeah, maybe that one gets lost in the edit. I don't know. It's hard to navigate that now. It sounds very strange.
Or even as a more adult situation. So when I stayed with Peaches last time in like 2019, was it 2019? When I stayed over at your place, Peaches.
I don't even remember.
Yeah, I met up with a girl from college because I thought, oh, here I am, a world traveler. One of the benefits of being a world traveler is I can message people when I'm in their city, and I can like meet up and something will happen. So I thought like, well, there's no harm in this. I'll just message
I remember this.
I was really upset because I was very frustrated about it. Because I'm like, I'll message this girl, we'll like go to dinner, and if something happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. But I don't know what the fuck she was expecting, because she thought it was a date, or if she thought it was like just friends. I don't really know, because I feel like I was appropriately setting things up. But there was a point at like, she asked me like partway through the dinner, like, well, why did you do this? And I was like, well, we kind of hooked up a little in college. I thought, well, maybe it'd be fun if we reconnect, do something tonight. And then she like started like spending the second half of the dinner like pitying me, of like, oh, you poor, sad, lonely man. I have friends in Prague you could meet up with. And I'm like, I'm not like desperately trying to find a girlfriend. I just was like in New York for a night. I didn't really say that part out loud, but it was very confusing to me of like, why can't we just like casually meet up for a night in New York? Like, why does this have to be weird? Why does it have to make me a lonely, sad old man? Is this something with you? Is it something with me?
Wait, what? So the vibe, she was approaching it like it was more of a date, and that's what got this. I don't
know if she thought there was like no romantic interest, or if she thought it was like a date. I don't really know. I was so confused. Yeah. I was like, what did you think that like this dude you made out with sometimes in college and like says, hey, you want to get dinner? I'm in town. Like, I'm not like trying to make you my girlfriend.
It was clear that you were just like swinging through, that you were leaving again, right?
Yeah, like I've been in Europe and in town for the day. Like,
yeah, I mean that is, I guess
we never fucked. Maybe we could fuck tonight. I didn't say that part, but
Sure, yeah. I've actually heard a few. I think this sort of scenario. I've heard of for a variety of stories like in this type of scenario where like things go awry like this. I don't think it's super uncommon for things to get sort of the communication to get botched, even though like I think like what you're saying of like, hey, just like let's meet up, and I do think like at the outset being like, here's what the situation is, I'm only in town for tonight, like is being upfront. I don't know, hard to say where it went wrong, but it does seem like this is a situation where I've heard other people also have awkward encounters and this sort of thing, because like it seems like it shouldn't be too hard to just be upfront and get it, but there's a million variables, I guess, a million things that can go wrong. So
yeah, dude, I don't know.
I wouldn't beat yourself up about it too much.
Yeah, I've just found dating in my 30s to be a goddamn, or late 20s to be a goddamn disaster. Actually, it's been better because some women do like there's. Mid-20s was really the awful point, I guess. But just how do you go about it? Talking to people.
I mean, I do feel like... Wait, so have you turned 30 yet?
Last October.
Nice. Congrats. For me, it did feel like a relief to turn 30, because I feel like 29 was like an uncanny valley where it was like, you're like kind of old for the people for people in their 20s, but you're not like, properly like over the hump yet. And then also I've learned that a lot of people just set their filters like on the apps to like no younger than 30 as well. So just in terms of like matching.
Are
with
you using
people
the
that seems
apps?
to help. I am, yeah.
Because I found them to be addictive pieces of shit that ruin my life and make me feel depressed.
I find that too, but it's also, it's just like there's it's weird, I think, right now to have like such a widely used like platform of, hey, come consent to talk to me in kind of a romantic or even like sexual way. And now like because that exists, like the alternative seems so
Aggressive and
daunting.
weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
how to go up to somebody without making it. It feels. This is one of the things I hate about Colombia is that it made me feel rapey for going and talking up to a woman at a bar. Like the way that we were taught sex at Colombia, their whole thing. Maybe it's something with me is my problem too. But like I didn't feel that way until we got all these stories of like microaggressions and shit. And then when I go and talk to a woman at a place, I feel like I'm committing an act of aggression. Like I feel like I'm being a bad person.
I mean, I think it's not bad to be aware of how you're coming. I guess I've never been a super forward person either. I do think also like college is a very particular environment that maybe requires particular care and attention, but I don't know. I mean, in contrast to like the apps, it's like, yeah, I'm kind of I think I've it would be nice to meet someone not that way. I don't think I'm like the type of person to like totally like chat someone up, but I do think there's like the in between of just like going out. I think it's also a good way to like make sure you're going out and being active and just doing things and like just checking out things in your city that you like and running into people that
and
way,
I was gonna say like the only kind of like bit of relationship, like more of a situationship, I guess, that I found myself across was because, I was just kind of making music in the community, and then I met up with someone who I knew, and then like I got introduced to her friend at like that event, and then we ended up talking. So I mean, like that kind of stuff still, like at least for me, I think, it's going on. I think still naturally, but it's just so there's so much promotion, I think, that people aren't even aware of, or acceptance of antisocial behaviors that's going on, and it's like weirdly being almost glorified to be antisocial too in some kinds of ways, where
I mean, like not going out or like rejecting societal norms. Like, in what sense do you mean antisocial?
rejecting social like things that incentivize sociability, or like to speak of random social occurrences as a positive act instead of and this is generally, I think, has to do with not necessarily narcissism problem, but a kind of like a selfishness problem of, like we are very in this antisocial way, like because we live in such a consumption society, we're very focused on what our personal only like goals are, not necessarily have a civic duty built into our culture. Like we don't clean up after ourselves like the Japanese do, for example. They have their own issues, don't worry.
Dude, what's with you and the Japanese anymore?
I've just been watching a lot of anime.
I remember I went out with a Japanese girl and all you did was talk shit.
What? Oh, I mean, yeah, like fuck the Japanese, obviously. Like they're all fascist idiots, but I'm
the
just,
culture
like,
though, you can't stop consuming it.
Well, yeah, of course, I mean, it's like America,
Right?
Actually, when we're talking about the greatness thing, a lot of my references to it's like, oh, like how am I thinking of Dragon Ball Z in the context of everything? But I mean, like, no, I think that like we're not, like if you look at prominent figures or like kind of like pop culture, people are just like, yeah, like, I'm gonna be my own thing, and it's mostly for, I think, good reasons or like not nefarious purposes. But I think this kind of like we've so ingrained like social justice language and liberal language for identity politics into every single facet of our society now, where like it's like, yeah, you are kind of attributing you not doing something antisocial to like ableism, for example. I think happens, which is like, yeah, I mean, like we should accommodate for people, but I think at large we're also normalizing a sense of, hey, we shouldn't talk to everyone. We're promoting basically that local news sense of everything is dangerous, like we need to be scared of the world instead
People
of
are avoiding taking responsibility for their
Anyway,
lives.
Marianne Williamson, 2020.
Whoa!
Yeah,
All right,
what?
this is where I get off. I can't.
You're not voting for Cornel West in the People's Party?
I forgot. I actually had not fully clicked through to read what the situation is with that, but.
Do you guys not feel the pressure? Last thing I'm going to bring up about this, but do you guys not feel the pressure of getting old? Like, not that you're too old to date, but that you feel like, not even that you're trying to get married, but just like, fuck, I ought to be a little bit more settled. Like, what am I doing still dating as a 30-year-old?
In some ways, that's an interesting question. I've been thinking about it a bit. Like, I think it's been an interesting mix for me because, like, as I was touching on a bit earlier, I do feel like in some ways hitting 30 has been, like, opening up for me. Also, like, I ended, like, a 7-year relationship last year where, and I think part of the context of that relationship as well is that we were kind of at maxed out, like, the point that we were going to get to. Like, we had talked and agreed that, like, you know, marriage and, like, kids wasn't really a goal for ourselves in that relationship. So ending or that relationship ending and, like, me opening up space to, like, think about different kind of things actually widened my potential horizons. So in a weird way, it's turning 30 has coincided and also directly been part of, like, feeling more opportunity in those kind of ways. It also means that, like, I wasn't spending my 20s, like, trying to date. Like, I was in a relationship, so, you know, it's not the same kind of, like, feeling of, like, oh, I should have found something. Like, I was in something settled for a while, and it didn't work out. It wasn't for the long haul. But now, like, I do feel sort of some enthusiasm for finding something else, you know, and adjusting to more who I am now, as opposed to something I got into when I was 24, 23. But that said, you know, part of me is a little aware of, like, if I want to get married and have a kid, I'm like, all right, 30 is still pretty young. But, like, you know, like, when I was telling Peaches about this, one way I conceptualize it is that I have a cat who's 3 years old. And I was like, if I, you know, knock on wood, everything goes well. But, like, if I were to have a kid, like, my cat would probably meet my child as a baby. Like, you know, it probably would happen. Ideally, my cat would live to at least be, like, 12 to 13 years old. And, like, that's probably when it wouldn't have to be when I had a kid if that happened. But, like, it's funny thinking about it in those terms. I'm not, like, too stressed about it yet, you know? Also, like, it's really kind of only been, like, 8 months proper of me, like, dating solo, and I feel relatively encouraged by how it's going. So it's been a mixed bag for me is my ultimate review, but I do feel a little bit of pressure. I think it's also different that, like, in New York, I think it's much, much, much more normal to be dating in your 30s and not married yet.
That's true.
And maybe I don't mean so much pressure as I mean a sort of kind of emptiness, a sort of kind of hole.
I don't know. I think also in my final piece on this is that my impression, meaning I've met a lot of people who in the last year, like, broke up with a partner. And I think, and that sort of, this includes me. It seems like my read is that at the beginning of the pandemic, there were people who broke up sort of early on because they're like, all right, just spending this amount of time together is not working. Or if they weren't living together, like, just the distance didn't work. And then I think people then dug in. And I think a lot of relationships that might have otherwise ended in about that 3-year period didn't. And then there was, like, a sort of a delayed mass ending of relationships in about last year. That includes me. So I'm very much projecting my own experience to that. But I've, like, just literally gone on a lot of dates with people where that was also true for them. So I do think that there's, like, that's sort of a social dynamic that is across the population for people our age in general, even outside of relationships. So I think, I forget what the original question is, but, like,
Do you feel an emptiness or, like, a...
Right. I guess, like, maybe responding to that, it's like, I do think there's, like, a weird glass half full thing that I'm experiencing where people are, like, just sort of relieved to have that behind them and are, like, trying to rebuild their relationships. Because, like, for me, it's also a bigger thing of just, like, reminding myself that, like, to go out and do things. Like I just got so used to like being like, oh, I can't go out and do anything like during the pandemic. Like, and just the impulse of like going out and finding things to do and just like literally asking people to hang out. Like I fell out of practice doing that and just like rebuilding that muscle. So I think some of it, sometimes it's a little, there's like pangs of awkwardness and sadness, but like ultimately I feel some sort of like shared vibe across people our age right now of trying to rebuild those bonds. And it makes me feel a little bit more optimistic than not.
I think I mean like I don't think it's like an emptiness for me, you know, who's so like aggressively single. But it's just kind of like the feeling, oh, this like there might be a few nicer things, or like it might be easier to take care of my dog if I had someone helping out sometimes, you know. But I don't know. I very much like I'm someone, I think I don't really have like a desire to get married necessarily, I don't think, or like have children in that kind of like traditional family way. I think like for me, my only feeling of emptiness is like a personal complex of like, oh, why aren't you like, you know, getting into this? Like, why aren't you like sustaining a relationship, or like, why aren't you dating more?
Like, what's wrong with you? Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But that's like, oh, that's a personal thing. That's not like because I'm not in a relationship. I feel like I'd have that kind of same feeling even if I was in a relationship. It's like, what am I doing here sometimes? Or like, well, that's a fear. Like I'm projecting, obviously, that I will have. But
Is there something wrong with you deep down, you mean?
not necessarily is there something wrong with me. I mean, like right now, I was telling Brit this earlier, but like right now my feeling is like, oh, is anyone like attracted to the energy I'm putting out there? But I'm also like not necessarily that concerned, because like I'm just trying to put out like what my energy is right now, and just
Sure.
kind of like.
But it is concerning. Like, can I be myself and people still find it attractive? Like,
But, you know,
that's a legit thing.
I like also like when I you know, like ended up developing a connection with someone I really did like want to develop a connection with, I found that had happened a little bit after I kind of gave up almost a little bit. And it was funny because I don't know, maybe it was just because I had less of that existential anxiety at that point, where I was just like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm just like on myself. And then
Yeah.
that came back obviously a little bit.
I feel like
when things happen, but yeah.
that there is a, I don't know if it's a phrase, but there's that sort of idea of like you find it when you're not looking for it sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And
I
maybe
think it's
that's
also
because,
like, go ahead.
I was just saying, maybe that becomes because when you're not looking for it, you're more authentically yourself, and people are attracted to authenticity.
Yeah, and I think
Right.
people are find like people who are relaxed and feel quietly confident very attractive. And also there's like the point of like ultimately you yourself cannot even know what you can't pin down your authentic self in any moment, right? You know, like you can't, every time you put your toe in the river, it's a different river, et cetera, et cetera. So like I think it's also like part of the joy of being in a close friendship or relationship is finding out things about yourself too, like things that you reflect off the other person, something that the other person tells you about yourself or makes you aware about yourself that you aren't even aware of yet. So like trying to like pin down something really specific and precise about yourself as a prerequisite is kind of hard to do, because a lot of times you only discover things about yourself through making those kind of relationships. And it's like always changing too. I mean, I feel like the key to relationships that survive are ones that are able to adapt and sort of renew in that way, and the ones that so often fail are ones that are still stuck, like pinned to a time where maybe you connected initially and were reflecting something back to each other when you first met, but it didn't adapt to the ways that you are both changing in different ways. I think that's probably, you know, very broad strokes, the most common way that people fall out of sync with each other.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. You know, I largely not been dating in my 20s, I guess, but the kind of like that made me a little worried about the type of person I would be in a relationship with someone else. But I think once I found myself kind of like connecting with someone, I was like, oh, I really enjoy kind of like the motivation I have right now, the type of person like I'm trying to like become in this instance. But also like I can see why people are like almost addicted to being in relationships, kind of in that way too, because it's like, oh, there's maybe you're extrapolating, like some people take that too far and extrapolate beyond that to, you know.
Yeah, it is helpful. I think like there's one sort of thing, like I've never actually used the term situationship before, but I guess it was a situationship, but that ended recently for me. That I'm surprised how bummed I was by it, and I kind of
That's just being older, dude. As someone who hasn't dated in your 20s, as someone who has, for someone who hasn't, the way you handle breakups now, they destroy me in a way they never did when I was 22.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting because we weren't like properly like exclusively dating yet. But anyway, I think the I've been trying to balance in my head like I think the reason we aren't like seeing each other that way anymore is sort of that she just wanted to start getting very serious with in her relationships and could tell that I wasn't necessarily in that space, and then part of me is like, damn, I kind of wish I were in that ready for that. But then like I'm balancing it with the knowledge of like, yeah, actually it has been very productive for me to like balance being solo and figure out how to like craft a little bit of my own sense of self and direction in this period. So it's there's a reason that was the situation.
Yeah.
There's a reason why that was true, and it's, even though it kind of sucks sometimes, it's like, well, I think it's probably still for the better that I'm kind of figure out my own rhythm right now for the next couple months.
But at the end of the day, both of them are kind of like self-actualization.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, on that topic, when you're older, you know what you want, and you kind of know who you are. If you don't know it, you know it better than you did when you were a kid. So I think that like even in situationships, you're throwing more of your authentic self into it. You know, like there's a lot more. You give a lot more of yourself to things that happen, even if they are just fucking.
I don't think
when you were 22.
I don't know if it's necessarily you're giving more as much as you're better at both finding and communicating the things that like you're really looking for, right? Or like
I think the two come together. I think the part of you that's able to say what you want and the part of you that feels hurt that like it doesn't work out are this like increased level of maturity, this increased level of self-knowledge.
I guess
you can disagree. But...
Well, I guess that's just to say I don't think that you necessarily aren't like you won't have that level of hurt when you're young either. I think it's just, kind of
but you don't really like when you just hook up with someone when you're young, you're not like really taking it personally.
I just mean that like you can also just like fall in like that kind of really deep connection with someone when you're young too, I think.
Yeah, certainly there can be hard breakups when you're young. And it's just a hypothesis, but I have found that like when things ended when I was young, it was like, meh. But when like things end now, even if they're just like me hooking up with someone, I do take them more personally.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I want to give you guys time to get to your soccer match. Thank you for doing this. Always glad to have you guys on.
Always love catching up with you, man.